I'm a bird watcher. Now, to say that feels a bit like coming out again. But I feel like luck is a safe space, and that extends to people who walk around on the weekend with binoculars slung over their shoulders. So on the weekend that I wrote this sermon, I was watching birds in what I would call my thin place, that place in the world where God just comes in so closely you can almost touch, you can feel their presence, but they're so close to you, as close as they could be without actually being in the presence of God. And so there I was in this little town on the mid-north coast called North Arm Cove. And I was watching this sea eagle. It was sitting on a branch above me on a dying gum tree and was devouring a fish. And I thought to myself, this is about the connection between bird watching and my relationship and everyone's relationship to God. And I know that might sound strange, but Psalm 46, I think, really highlights this for us. But how is bird watching like being a child of God? Well, this psalm is a song, and so this is my spoken song to you. It is a bird song, if you will, a call to all of you in the wilderness to continue the avian imagery, my flock of birds here today, and I just want this to be a call in the wilderness to look, to see, and to notice. It may sound strange, but it's eye contact with wild animals that I crave. The other night, I stopped off at the Chinese Gardens of Friendship. Now, cheapskates among us may be interested to know that it is free to watch the koi from the ponds in front of the gardens. I go often, and that evening there were no fish, but there was a water dragon sitting beside the wall, so close I could almost touch it. And as I stared into its little round eye, I felt so seen. And I watched it, staring unblinkingly back at me, and it had little ants crawling all over it. And it did not move. And I know I promised you birds, and there will be birds, but this lizard taught me exactly what Psalm 46, I think, is trying to say. And I just like to say an ant just crawled on my leg, so I think that that's some bit of God right there. So, yes. Now, recently I was on holidays in Tahiti and I thought of this psalm, and I know that sounds like one of those horrible, humble brags, but I promise you it has relevance to this sermon. There the landscape is like New Zealand meets Fiji. The water is crystal clear and the mountains rise straight out of the sand almost. And I stood there watching it one morning and I thought this perfectly encapsulates the imagery of Psalm 46. In those verses 2 and 3, the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam. There were the static, unmoving mountains, and below the constantly moving, fluctuating sea. This was our world, at once completely calm and yet also moving, changing, constantly on the move. Just like God to me. I think God has this capacity to be both static, stoic, and yet completely tumultuous as well. And this contradiction is somehow wrapped up in God's nature to me. And I thought about this, and I thought how neither those mountains or that sea were better or worse for this capacity. They were both perfectly beautiful and perfectly wonderful because of it. And here I was, right amongst them. And that is how we are in nature. As the author and biblical teacher Hannah Anderson talks about it in the ecumenical podcast Renovare, nature is not something we stand apart from, looking out on. Rather, we are right inside it. We are in the snow globe, she talks about it as. Now, snow globes, they have that capacity to be completely still, and then you shake them, and they've got that chaotic wildness to them too, just like nature itself, and just like God in this psalm. Leader of the Reformation, Martin Luther, turned this psalm into a hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." Luther was going through a time of deep depression when he wrote this hymn. But it is a psalm that says God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way. The earth gives way for us regularly, personally, collectively, universally. But the collective language in this psalm, the our, the we, the us, the parts of which may have been originally sung by a choir, they are what make it bearable. It is community that connects us and sustains us, but not simply the community of other people, the whole connected community of nature. So yes, there is this capacity in our communities, in our world, for tumultuousness and for calm, for anger and for peace. Verses like 3 and 4, though its waters quake with and foam and mountains quake with their surging, and the opposing image of a river whose streams make glad the city of God, tell us this. But what is God asking us to do with that? How should we respond to this worldly capacity for wildness and strength? Wildness and serenity. I think that one part of this psalm holds some of the answers. It's the verse that led me to preach on this psalm, and it's at the heart of this message. Be still and know that I am God. Now, most of us know these lines as an exhortation to meditation, and that's how I've always seen them. But their intention was never really thus. I've now found that there were more about what theologians Robert L. Jr. Hubbard and Robert K. Johnson put it as letting God be God. Allowing God to be God. And here we come to how being a child of God is like bird watching. Because when you stand, binoculars to your eyes, you cannot control what you are going to see. This is what I love about watching animals in nature. The unpredictability, the chance, the unknown. God, like nature, cannot be controlled by our own selves and our small-minded power plays. Just like that lizard I spoke of had to sit and allow the discomfort of those ants, we sometimes have to sit in God's brokenness and let God be God. As a recovering control freak, this is very liberating. To, as they say, let go and let God. One way to do this is to look at what is called the circle of control. So what is inside it is actually very small. It's the things we can control. So perhaps our own actions or how we use our energy and our time. Outside is almost everything else. It's the weather, it's the future, it's other people. And once we realize that these things cannot be controlled by us, we realize that our capacity for change may be a little bit smaller than what we thought it was, but our capacity for love can grow because we learn that our one-person mission to save the world is, well, that's already happened. Hello, Jesus. Or if we think that we are looking for a perfect world, well, that's either, depending what you believe, it's either never going to happen, or it'll only be once we pass off this mortal coil. So once we realize that we can love those around us, and we can love our world for how it is and for what it is. I want to note that this is not about being passive or a passenger in life. It means instead putting ourselves back in our place. It means putting God back up as the ultimate and us as the disciples on earth, which is, I believe, liberating, not oppressive. As they say, it's lonely at the top. When we put ourselves as mini-gods, it's exhausting, it's debilitating, and frankly, it can be a bit of an insult to God. Because instead of trusting God, we are saying we know better. There is mystery to God, and sometimes their reasoning is really beyond our comprehension. But instead of rallying against it and shaking our fists, sometimes comfort can come from letting God be God, to do as my sister says, and to say to ourselves, Jesus, take the wheel. Now, the Quakers have a beautiful way of doing this, where instead of when someone is struggling, they don't rush in and try and fix it. They hold them in God's presence. They visualize the person being held and supported by God. It is a holy act of saying, God, wrap your arms around this person, hold them tight, and perhaps through that love, something may change. And so, let us learn to walk that fine line between action and release, to free ourselves to be agents of love. As nature teaches us, there are wonderful things and terrible things that make up this world. But as the poet Mary Oliver writes, we shake with joy, we shake with grief, housed as they are in the same body. And so I say to you all, shake. And in that shaking, shake love over all, because that is what holds the power, God's love, and that love imparted unto us all.